of owning a cafe and other heroic deeds, by Beware the Tristero. Chapter 5. What makes a parent? As 1900 approached, he sent Dobby, who looked progressively more uneasy, into the kitchen and told him to eat the sandwiches for his evening meal. Then the police had arrived. He'd given an official statement, shown them his quirk license, handed over a flash drive of the CCTV footage, and greeted the children's parents as they rushed in. The kids were balls of energy and were already glamorizing his exploits to their parents, who had thanked him, paid him, and taken the tots to the hero still loitering outside for autographs or something. The salaryman had patted him on the shoulder, and after such an evening, he'd closed up early. Shinso Kimiko, he'd insisted, was still sat on the bench.
I don't mean to pry.
He started, his body leaning against the table.
But do you have someplace to go?
I have an apartment, she murmured quietly, her head nodding to the gray, giant, run-down complex looming over them. Me and my son, we need money because my husband died. Pulling out some more napkins, he passed them to her and let her settle a bit. She had a kid who was who knew where right now. We had to move here a month ago. I couldn't afford the rent elsewhere, she continued after a beat. Hitoshi's been so brave, and I have to leave him so often, but he's so brave. She tried to laugh. His father and I, we married straight out of high school, and he was the smart one. She shuddered. And I just had the looks. She juggled, the sound a little hysterical. And boss Sasawa, he runs this block. He wants me to work for him, but I...
Shinso-san.
He carefully got in.
I know it's not much, but I can offer you a job here if you'd like,
he said. What?
She balked. Think about it.
He shrugged.
Your son can stay here when school's out, and I can see you both home in the evenings.
He offered.
I'll give you full training, and there should always be food available.
He mused. That's very kind, Aizawa-san, she murmured. I know. I don't want to cause you any more trouble.
You won't,
he told her calmly.
Regardless of anything else, you're always welcome here, all right?
They exchanged numbers, and she promised to call him if she needed anything. She was giving her boy, 6, by God, his number too, just in case. He'd be coming by after tomorrow. And watching as she scurried home, Shouta sighed, his hands redoing the locks. The heroes by now had fucked off to wherever they were needed next, and now all he had to do was tidy things up, pray that Dobby was still around, and that he hadn't trashed the place. A more sensible part of his brain was accosting him for trusting the kid with so much so soon. Get him settled upstairs, and start preparing his wares.
You're gonna offer everyone around here a job, not so old guy?
Blinking, his hands preoccupied with filling his mop bucket up with boiling water and cinnamon-scented cleaner, the cafe owner watched as the teen he'd been thinking about walked through the kitchen's fire door, one of the sandwiches on a plate that he pushed towards him on the service bar.
No, that would be irrational,
he replied with a grin.
Thank you, by the way.
What for?
You were willing to get rid of that guy, weren't you?
He asked, their eyes locking.
Regardless of what that might mean for you, you weren't going to let him hurt Shinso-san, were you?
That prick had it coming, the other replied blithely, his form leaning on the worktop to look at it carefully. And you gave it to him pretty hard, he smirked. And now I know why you weren't scared of me that day. You can erase quirks, can't you? Humming through a nod, his mop dunked and wrung out, the older shrugged a bit.
You're partly right, he admitted. I wasn't scared about property damage, he told him. But I wasn't scared of you because you didn't give me a reason to be.
What?
When I looked at your face,
he began, the steaming threads now sliding across the linoleum.
I saw an expression that had stared back at me in the mirror 1,000 times or more.
He explained, the other's scowl slowly softening.
The same expression that the 4 kids I helped to raise in our care center wore most days.
And what expression is that? The younger chuffed, his arms folding gruffly.
One that says, what the fuck did I do to get shit on so hard?
He answered honestly.
One that wonders why the universe picked you to spit on when everyone else seems to be so happy.
He furthered, their eyes meeting.
Am I wrong?
Scoffing, the dark-haired boy looked away.
I'm not telling you anything, and I didn't ask,
he reminded.
But I'm here to listen, if you ever change your mind,
he assured, whilst shoving his filled bucket further down the way.
You could hardly wait to tackle the toilets.
Do you need any help? Smiling, he nodded at the cleaning station at the end of the service bar.
The tables could do with another wipe down,
he said. Nodding, Dobby was moving before he'd finished talking, those turquoise eyes rolling.
Make sure you eat that sandwich, he called over his shoulder. You gotta eat too, right?
By 2100, the cafe was sparkling. Most of his prep work was done. He was glad that he'd kept his menu quick and simple. The bread makers were turning, all of the dishes were washed and dried a la flame quirk, and he'd even baked a few dozen scones that'd keep and be just as enjoyable tomorrow. The kid had watched, asked questions, and even grabbed a few of the bigger items he'd needed out of the back pantry. He'd watched him sneak an apple and told him to take two.
I hope you're not expecting the Ritz,
he told his lodger as they walked up the back stairs to the apartment.
See how you like it, and if at the end of the week you're happy to stay here, I'll get you a key cut, alright?
Beat sleeping behind the 7-Eleven, he heard the other mutter. Furrowing his brows, Shouta hummed in the back of his throat before jamming his key into the door at the top of the stairs and pushed the door open. Then, flicking on the switch, he walked in and watched as the other followed.
Ugh!
The 16-year-old blinked.
Where is all your stuff? You're looking at it, he stated with a shrug. It's impractical to buy things that don't serve a purpose,
he reasoned.
So, this is the living dining area,
he continued, his hand gesturing at the one couch, a wall-mounted TV, and a desk below one of the room's two windows. Said furniture held his old yet reliable computer, a printer, his phone charger, and the Wi-Fi hub. The floor was covered in tatami mats, and there was one clock on the main wall. The small kitchenette, which you didn't really use, the cupboard space was useful for the takeout boxes, cups, napkins, and cleaning products, though, lined the back wall that similarly hosted 3 doors. One led to the small yet functional bathroom. He hoped the kid at it meant expecting a bath. The other 2, of course, covered the bedrooms.
Forget what I said before,
Dobby murmured as he looked around.
You're not a saint, you're a monk, he chuckled. Yeah, well, don't get coming to me for blessings or anything, he snorted back. Not so long as there's no structural damage. You can do whatever you want to your room, if you decide to stay, he furthered, because the kid needed to know that he had an out. He wouldn't be surprised if he'd felt caged in by his parents or something. Then, without preamble, he opened the door to the spare room. Luckily, Yoshida-san had let him keep what bits of furniture had been in the apartment, and since he'd never throw anything useful away, because that would be irrational, there was plenty of bedding, the futons had been wrapped up in plastic, and after a quick wash, everything was serviceable. There'd even been 6 virtually brand new pillows! Huh?
The team blinked as he followed him inside.
It's bigger than I thought,
he admitted softly. Humming in agreement, both of the bedrooms were of a good size by most realistic standards. Shouta looked around the white chamber approvingly. He'd painted the whole place in that color. He'd had enough left after renovating, and he didn't see the point of wasting it. There was a simple shade on the main lamp, a built-in wardrobe, the futon with a set of bedding he'd brought in earlier that afternoon, a chest of drawers, and a curtained window.
Look,
he said.
I don't know what normal people your age want, he admitted, because at your age I was living like this. I've always lived like this,
he stated.
So if there's anything you need, I'll see what I can do, and when we get your employment contract sorted, you can spend your yen on whatever.
He shrugged.
I won't need rent money because I bought this place outright.
You're going to be bankrupt at this rate, the younger cut in bluntly. And besides, I don't really need much either, he said.
Thanks, though. You're welcome.
He nodded.
I'll let you get settled in,
he added whilst heading to the door.
Let me know if you need anything, okay? Oh, and if you want, the TV's set up, so...
Watching as the kid bowed a little in understanding, the older man walked out of the room and closed the barrier behind him. What was he doing? What should he say? Shaking his head, he padded towards his own room and entered it. He'd leave his door open just in case. If Dobby needed him, he could be there quickly. If Dobby was putting on a front and was looking to wreck the place, steal his stuff, or try to attack him, because people were irrational and he was probably definitely ridiculously stupid to open up his home to a strange boy so quickly, then he'd be able to react quicker and erase that dangerous quirk before too much damage could be done. He had no doubt that he wouldn't be able to do the boy without hurting him if he needed to. That decided, he set his alarm clock, sat on his futon, opened his laptop, and started to make the necessary changes to the policies and paperwork of his business. He'd not been planning on hiring anyone, really, but he was glad that he'd already started to investigate what he'd need to do before now. Only time would tell if he needed to action anything. Toya didn't know when or how he'd fallen asleep, but he had. God, he'd missed having a bed, and damn, after a quick wash in the bathroom, the toothbrush in his clothing bag now resting near Aizawa's on their shared sink, those clean sheets had smelled and felt so good! And Aizawa had kept his word. He'd not been touched, he'd not been hurt, the bedroom door was unlocked. Sitting up after a yawn, he'd shuffled into the living room and looked around at the plain, simple furnishings before his nose led him to the apartment's door. Shit, the not-so-old guy was up already? What time was it? Looking to the clock, his brows rising, he could hardly believe that it was 6:45. He'd not slept this late in years. Huffing, he returned to his room, grabbed his other set of clothes, and returned to the bathroom. The older man had offered him the use of the washing and drying machines he'd bought to clean his own clothes and uniforms. This sure as hell beat flitting in and out of convenience store toilets to wash his aching skin and keep himself clean. He was surprised that the other man had some great shampoos and soaps, though. However, the guy was a neat freaking hair. That lustrous didn't just maintain itself, did it? Then, once he was clean, he'd kept his shower quick, but God, had he enjoyed it! He threw on his clothes and dressed. He headed down the stairs and into the kitchen. The kitchen whose door had a note on it. Breakfast in on the back workbench if you want it, and if you're interested in helping out today, please put on the cap and apron. Feeling his brows lift, the former Todoroki entered the room, his lungs filled with the scent of bread, tamagoyaki, and cake. Swallowing thickly, his mouth already watering, he was at the back workbench and digging into the platter of onigiri, omelet, and miso soup that had been kept warm under a heated lamp before he realized what he was doing. God damn! It was all delicious! What? A That's amazing! Blinking, shit, there were already customers here? Toya carefully got up from the stool that had been left for him, that thoughtful prick, and approached the fire door which led to the service area, his head peeking through the circular window. What do you say, Katsuki? Wow! It's totally awesome! Thanks! Looking at a relatively tall woman with blonde hair and red eyes, he could see the child he'd heard, but if genetics were anything to go by, then she was that loud-mouthed Bakugo's mother. The flame quirk user huffed and went back to his food. The man who'd taken him in had even put a mug of coffee out for him, hadn't he? Who'd have ever thought he'd receive more kindness and consideration for a complete stranger in 1 week than he'd ever had from his own bastard prick of a father in his whole lifetime?